tree selection, we want to be very thoughtful and forward-thinking in our choices. In the profile of the Incense Cedar, Chalcedrus decurrens, this is one of the best choices for the California landscape to give consideration to. We remember that it is a native tree, native to California, a beautiful specimen tree, single leading upright trunk, very symmetrical. The central single leading tip is the normal form of the tree, although sometimes we'll see them go into a double or a triple lead, but usually kept in the single lead, they're at their best and the strongest. The foliage is a dark, rich green, soft to the touch. It isn't prickly and spiky like many of the junipers might be. The foliage is so lush it almost looks like it's been wetted with water, glossy and glistening. It has a very rough, fibrous bark with many different colors of red and maroon and rust, reminiscent of the California redwood, Sequoia sempervirens. However, not as large as the California redwood. They can grow as a dryland tree. They do benefit from some irrigation. Their minimum rainfall is something in that 18 to 20 inches of rainfall a year, natural rainfall. 50, 60 inches is fine with the species. It should be grown primarily as a dryland tree with occasional supplemental water if the tree shows some drought stress. They're quite diverse and versatile in their adaptability. They can grow from near sea level up to 7,000 to 8,000 feet elevation. They will tolerate shade at the beginning of their life, but eventually they like a good splash of light. So full sun is fine eventually for the tree, although they will rise in partial shade within a forest stand. Strong in the ground is not a tree that is likely to blow over, although they don't want their roots disturbed. Once installed, the root system should be left alone. We don't want tilling and tining and trenching and turning over the soil or compacting of the soil near the tree. It is not considered root aggressive. It doesn't lift and buckle and heave like so many trees will. It is a very easily tamed tree in the landscape. They don't overwhelm. They don't produce a dense, heavy, dark shade. There is some openness to the canopy. Light comes through. Their radius is not that great compared to many landscape trees. We find that as the incense cedar goes from infancy to juvenile to more mature form, the spread of the canopy is rather narrow. It's a very symmetrical tree with evenly spaced radial branches that keep the tree in a very symmetrical and aesthetic form. The incense cedar is just about disease-free. We see them very seldom with any kind of afflictions. In fact, the only problems that we generally come across with the incense cedar is that the tree has been mispruned or there has been root damage. In fact, the tree does not need to be pruned at all. It is a zero pruning tree. It can be allowed to stand as a benign neglect specimen, allowed to rise on its own natural genetic morphology. We wash them down now and then, make it rain in the desert, wash down the foliage, knock down the dust and debris that we find accumulates in trees in urban settings. The rinse down is huge for the cedar. They love that rinse down. The disadvantages of the incense cedar are so few that we can hardly think of any. One of the complaints we sometimes hear is that development at the beginning is somewhat slow. About 5-6 years into the installation, we'll find the tree will then really begin to grow seriously, and it then will accelerate. And as the tree establishes, it will grow more and more each year. It'll grow more than it grew the year before. It isn't difficult to get them up to 18 inches, 20 inches, 2 feet in diameter in time. One of the concerns on the incense cedar is that we would never want to go under any overhead obstructions, overhead wires, utility lines, cable, telephone lines, anything that would interfere with the single upright leading tip. We would want to choose our site very carefully. They don't like a lot of competition. The incense cedar does not like to rise up and come into contact with other trees. So as we culture the incense cedar, we would want to keep a window of accommodation opened up for the tree to rise up without interference. We wouldn't want to plant the tree on the north side of a tall dominating species. We'd want to plant it on the sunny side of competition plants that might gain higher crown height. The incense cedar is not the tallest tree in the grove. We see 35, 45, 55 feet, 60 feet is not unusual in, say, a 2-foot trunk diameter. But of course this would take decades upon decades to gain that kind of maturity and size. The incense cedar is one of the most desirable and valuable trees you can have in the landscape. It is in the most desirable category of what they call 100% valuation trees, like the oak, the sycamore, the deodar cedar. The incense cedar can stand on site not just for decades, but for centuries. The tree has a very, very long lifespan. It's a good investment for the long range. Incense cedar can add $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to property value. They are, again, 100% valuation trees. They are at the top of the appraisal charts. And you know why when you observe them closely and understand their nature. I would like to see a strong movement to go in with more of the cedar species because of their durability, their long life, their low water requirements, and their habitat qualities.